puts fuel on the fire of the bubble. But you cannot have a bubble without easy money and easy credit. And if 0% interest rates isn't easy money, what is?
You know, Ron, I just want to point out, and just say stop, and I'm not going to argue that there aren't causes and effects out there that we should be studying and looking at and taking sometimes corrective action. And that's what we're attempting to do now as we do regulatory reform. As you well know, we spent the last year intensely studying what could be done to try and prevent and project what may happen in the future and what actions could be taken to prevent those actions to stop these crises. But let me say, it isn't all bad. We had the creation of the SEC and the strong regulatory acts of the 1930s, and we prevented a financial crisis in this country for 75 years. Even though every 25 years...
There was a crisis in the 70s? No crisis in the 70s? I mean, ask Paul Volcker if he had a crisis.
No,
in the 70s.
we had inflation, and we were able to bring Volcker in and his policies and correct that inflation, and that's what the system should do.
So what do you call that? A minor correction, but not a crisis, huh?
Well, yeah, much different. We didn't have a total collapse this time. Maybe what we should have done is let that happen, and then all of you in the free market system would have been perfect. We would have wiped out for decades, and everybody would have been in a collapse situation. Then you'd be happy. What Volcker did this time was act with responsible leadership with the Secretary of Treasury and the President, your Secretary of President, a Republican, not a Democrat, and they did a pretty good job of rescue. But all of you fellas want to label this as having been a failure because you really don't want to see it succeed. I think you have a negative attitude toward the American economy.
If regulations are so good, and I know we're piling on the market for regulations, the SEC would have prevented this crisis. The SEC would have prevented the Enron scandal. Sarbanes-Oxley would have prevented. Every time you put on regulations, you chase our businesses overseas. That's why the businesses are leaving, and you're going to do a lot more of that because the burden will be so great, and that's why we're not having a good recovery.
Well, then we just should...
Because they see taxes coming down and regulations coming down.
According to your theory, Ron, we should allow then a business to go uninterrupted, do anything at any time with anything because they can't possibly make mistakes.
Paul. Come on, no, you allow them to go bankrupt, you don't bail them out. Yes, we would allow General Motors to do what they want when they screw up and they go bankrupt. Let them go bankrupt. You don't take good people's money and bail them out. You don't bail out banks.
Do you accept the proposition that if we hadn't gone into the rescue program a year ago, almost every large bank in the United States and in the world would have collapsed within 72 hours?
No. Some would. Some would, but we'd be over it by now. In 1921, Paul, that's exactly what we did. We still didn't accept all your Keynesian economics. In 1921, the recession, depression, it was severe after the inflation of World War I. They had hands off, and it was over in a year. That's what always happened before. When they inflated, they caused a bubble, there was a correction. But in the 1930s, Hoover was the culprit, and Roosevelt followed up, and they prolonged the agony for 15 years. That depression didn't end until after World War II, believe me. People weren't doing well until after then. So, yes, you want hands off, but you want to enforce the laws against fraud and enforce the law of bankruptcy. That's a federal regulation. But what we do is we don't allow the bankruptcy. We take the good people's money and bail out the bad investments, prop up all the mistakes, and that is what you're doing. You're just pouring out the money, hoping to patch up the hole in the bubble. Hey, it's not going to work, and believe me, I'm not happy about it, no matter what you say.
Congressman Paul, we want to thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your joining us today.